Hi folks, welcome to Hat Friday. This is just to remind us during lockdown what day of the week it actually is. We need a point of reference for the rest of the week. See,
You'd think our point of reference would be when we get out to go in the sauce, mate, really? But I suppose we can dress it up by just saying, look, it's Hat Friday.
Well, we're having a quiet Friday, Jimmy, are we not? There's no
yes, absolutely. No rum this weekend.
Friday. So welcome to the iWrite Radio podcast. I've got Jimmy Hutton with me. Stuart's still on furlough. I'm Norrie Stewart. We're going to cover Nicholas Sturgeon's daily press conference. We're going to have a wee chat about English county councils. The BBC is getting a mention. And the exam fiasco, is that fair, in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, that is being totally ignored by the Scottish press at the moment.
Aye, that doesn't exist if you're a writer on a Scottish newspaper, does it?
No, it doesn't. The press conference, Jimmy, what struck you about today's?
Hey, there was a couple, mate. Again, we've got some serious numbers up in the Grampian region, so there was quite a detailed breakdown of what's going on and how Test and Protect is working up there, up to over 1,000 contacts now for that pub cluster. So
wow,
they appear to be doing something right, given that they've got so many contacts, they've got so many people self-isolating. So hopefully the numbers will start to drop up there. But at the moment, they seem, I wouldn't say they're climbing, they seem to have plateaued, but it's still ongoing.
I thought Jason Leach's explanation of what they're trying to achieve was quite good today. When he basically said, look, this is a 3-week fight.
Yeah.
And at the moment, they're kind of at the top of the curve, that they're trying to bend it over and get it to come down. But I thought that was quite informative.
Yeah, I thought actually the whole press conference today was quite informative, mate. It seemed clear to me that Nicola wanted to get across, there are new rules, or the guidelines have become mandatory for hospitality today. So she wanted to get across exactly what these guidelines are and just point out to both the operators of the hospitality venues and the customers exactly what they need to be doing this weekend to keep themselves safe. So I thought there was a lot of detail. There was a lot of... she asked, I think, about 3 times during the presser for people who were watching it to remember and tell their family members who are at work, tell people who haven't seen it.
On.
Pass it on. So I thought it was a decent message. And also we had the bold Humza there to tell us about new investment going into trying to get effectively virtual jury rooms that they're setting up in cinema complexes to get High Court trials back on the go again, which, again, who would have thought that the Scottish legal system would be amongst the first to embrace virtual technology, work out a way to make it work. And apparently this is also going to be in the pipeline for Sheriff Court trials, so that we can get on with the trials that basically haven't been happening in the last few months.
The cinema thing was one of those ideas that very obvious once it's been suggested.
Aye, it's not something about, but you're right. As soon as you hear the idea, you think, wow, what a great idea. Because these places are absolutely set up to do the job that we're asking them to do. And at the moment, they can't really open. So why not accuse the Scottish Government a way of trying to help?
Aye. I mean, it does kind of 3 things. It gives an income to the cinema. You've got the big screen, which will make it kind of more realistic, I suppose. I'm presuming that's what they'll do. They'll project onto the big screen.
Aye.
And it gives you your social distancing.
Gives it perfect for that. And it also, I mean, there are trials that need to be ongoing right now. You know what I mean? There's folks sitting in custody waiting to go to trial. You'd hate any of these people to be released because of a time bar thing, for example.
Aye, well, and the other thing is they're quite easy to police. Most of them, I'm presuming they're going to use the smaller cinemas and the big complexes. and you've only got one door in, one door out, and the escape doors. So, and I mean, security will be an issue. No,
Yeah.
it seems like a roundly sound idea.
As I
Is
say,
he
imagine.
crossing his fingers, wondering what will go wrong?
I mean, as I say, imagine the Scottish legal community being quite so embracing of new technology and cyber jury rooms. But there we go. It does seem like a decent system. So let's hope it all works out.
I wonder if they'll be taped to be shown in cinemas at a later date.
I do hope so. I quite
Of
enjoy.
all the big trials.
Well, see, I quite enjoy all these behind-the-scenes stuff that they've been doing in the Scottish legal community the last few years, mate. I enjoyed watching the Supreme Court decision coming in.
Aye.
There's been 2 or 3 documentaries that I've watched where you get to see trials, you get to see QCs and the Lord Advocate appearing in front of the top judges of the country and that, and it's an interesting insight into just how normal these people actually are when they're at their work. Because I don't know about you, I've never been involved in a High Court trial, so there was a kind of mystique about it that all just the scales have been taken from my eyes, shall we say.
I'm one of the many, I think, that's been called up to a jury trial. I think it's happened to me about 3 times now. And the guy pleads guilty.
Oh.
So you're sitting in the jury room, you're sitting waiting to go in to see if you're picked.
Mm.
And the wee court guy comes in and says, "Oh, you can all go home now."
That's a bit, Shan. Once you're up there, you want a wee bit of the action, mate. You want a wee bit of the Petricelli in that,
You want a wee bit of excitement, but it doesn't happen. The big thing I noticed was the desperate questioning for a headline today. I think the one that came up most was, "Are you going to ban pub crawls?"
Yeah, it was. I do wonder about, as I say, we know that some of the journals, some of the hyena pack are on holiday at the moment, but in all seriousness, and I know students are coming back, and there are companies out there that organise pub crawls, but they can't possibly be thinking of operating this year. I like to go to a pub. I like to sometimes go to 2 or 3 pubs in an evening, but since all this malarkey with the virus and since pubs have opened, I don't think I've yet gone to more than 1 pub. I didn't understand why anybody would want to. I can't think there's a huge amount of people doing massive pub crawls. The Rose Street or the Leith Walk pub crawl of our youth, mate, folk aren't be going to do that nonsense now, are they?
Well, it's when you see the hen and stag parties appearing that you really have to worry.
Well, surely Edinburgh being a particular hotspot, surely this year you'd be allowed to take out a hen and stag party. Go out with a walking stick or a spud gun or something just to execute them.
My daughter, who manages a restaurant up in the middle of Edinburgh, right in the middle of Edinburgh, she's had 3 or 4 hen parties, not stag parties, hen parties. And I think she's refused to serve 2 of them, I think, because of the way they were acting.
Aye, you ken the job that I do, mate. They're no as well behaved once they've got 2 or 3 glasses of vino collapsed down their neck. But there you go. If it's actually happening, fine. There should be regulation about it. And clearly, you're not allowed to go out with a walking stick or a baseball cue and just baseball bat and just take these people out in the streets. I would hate to think that I'm encouraging people to do that, but there's got to be ways of regulating these.
What you're doing is telling them not to.
Absolutely.
Do not interact with the nutters.
Stay away from the bammers. Aye, just leave them in peace, and with a bit of luck, the old virus will take care of a decent percentage of them.
Oh. The other headline they were all hunting for was Sturgeon forces quarantine on UK government. There was, I think, 2 questions basically asking if the devolved administrations, to put it politely, had forced the UK government's decision to impose quarantine on holidaymakers from France and Malta and somewhere I don't think I'd ever heard of before.
Aye, there's Aruba, I believe, somewhere in the Cayman Islands. But mate, it's again, you laugh at the press. London listens to the devolved administrations on approximately nought. So how on earth are we twisting their arms on quarantine when we can't get them to sit down round a table and have a serious discussion about their power grabs?
I actually thought her answer to that was instructive, which was, if the numbers tell you there has to be quarantine, you want to impose it as quickly as possible, which is only common sense. I mean, I feel sorry for the folk that are stuck there, but if they didn't have it in their mind that they could end up getting quarantined when they came back, they'd not be reading the papers.
Life has softened you, Norman. It's rubbed off. It's curved off the sharp edges on you, mate. I've got very little sympathy for anybody who's stuck in France or Holland now and can't get home.
Well, my wife's desperate to get to the sun, so that might be the reason.
I wouldn't blame you, mate. But if you go to the sun and then things change and you've got to do a 14-day quarantine, hell, mend you.
The reality is, I mean, for the likes of us, it would make little difference. I mean, what work I do from home.
Yeah.
And Jill's part-time at her work now, so
we
could probably handle it.
I've very little sympathy for people who've gone on holiday to France, for example. You can take a look. It's no difficult to go online and take a look at the numbers. France has been seeing an uptick for about a fortnight in terms of the numbers of new cases and that. So if you've jumped on a cheap deal to France and then you're being caught out, no luck.
Well, do you know what actually, thinking about those numbers, we followed France quite closely in the way our curves have gone.
Yeah.
So, there, but for the grace of God, or maybe in 2 weeks, God's grace won't be on us.
It could be, certainly the way that the numbers, the numbers of new cases in England have stubbornly remained at what I would say is quite a high level.
I came across a tweet from a guy called Ivor Cummings. There's a thing that's starting to get a bit of traction, case-ademic. And what they're arguing is that because of the amount of testing, and the curve is going back up for the number of cases, but the deaths and the hospital admissions are fairly static and very low. And he's pointed to, I think, Sweden, France, the UK. And there is a spike. The spike's there for the number of cases, but hospital deaths and admissions are static.
Yeah, I seen some. I read something based around the factory in, I think, the north of England, the M&S sandwich place.
Right. Yeah.
Where they tested a lot of staff, and 300 had tested positive, but none of them are particularly ill.
Yeah.
And they were positing the case that it may be that the human body is finding a way to deal with coronavirus slightly better now, given that it's more prevalent within the community and our bodies are reacting. I mean, it was just, there was no real scientific basis behind it, but they were quite surprised that quite so many in this factory had it and none of them were ill. So, I mean, who knows how it interacts with, how a virus interacts with its host, for example. I didn't care a great deal about it.
Well, what we haven't heard a lot about, and I'm surprised at this, is the way the clinicians, the frontline doctors and nurses, seem to have found ways to mitigate the effects. It's maybe because they don't have a cure, but they can suppress the worst of it.
Aye, there definitely seems to be
I'm hoping that's the case.
I'm hoping there's, me and all, mate, there doesn't seem to be the outright panic within the medical community that there was March, April, May. People were dropping like flies. They seem to have a more balanced approach to this. And it could just be that, come on, they've been trying every drug under the sun to try and mitigate it. So it could just be they've found a few that are working. And like you said the other day, there are far less people now on forced oxygen. They're using a different kind of treatment. There's no needing to put people on incubators. Incubators. You can, but I mean, you need a hell of a big incubator.
Even tracheotomies.
Mm-hmm.
Aye, it's actually forced oxygen they're using.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it appears to be working. So fingers crossed for that one.
The other thing that came up, God, I've forgotten. What was it?
I'm just quickly looking. I think that was kind of it, really, for the press of the day.
I know what it was, and it was a question at the presser. It was the probe into the exam thing, what will we call it? Yeah, we'll call it a fiasco.
Burach.
A Burach would be a better one. The guy that's going to lead it was, during the general election, a supporter of the SNP candidate in his area. A lot of people seem to think that this should disqualify him from leading the investigation. And I've actually been on Twitter today pointing out to some people that if supporting the SNP means that you can't lead an investigation, that cuts out 57%, according to the latest poll of the
entire population.
Points that were made to me are sound points. I wouldn't be happy if it was an investigation into something the Tories had done being led by a rabid Tory. That's true, I wouldn't be. But if you're a professional and you can put to one side your bias, your presumed bias is really more accurate, why not? And unfortunately, the problem with that is when you think about it, you don't know if the person in charge's professionalism has overcome any bias until they report.
It's difficult because he's starting off, his pitch has kind of been cleared by people pointing out his political background. However, like you say, you
don't know till they
just
deliver.
Automatically disbar people because they supported a candidate in a previous election.
Well, what jumped into my mind was the Russian report, because there we effectively had two Tories who went against the government, one to take the chair and one who was the ex-chair and was pushing for it to be published. So even the Tories have men of integrity, which is what you need.
I've not read massively on this. I did see a few bits and bobs, but the guy is eminently qualified to do the job that they're asking him to do. So do you disbar those who are eminently qualified if they have expressed any political opinion whatsoever? It seems a crazy thing to do.
It's a presumption we're all guilty of.
Absolutely.
If you see a link between somebody and a political party, and that somebody is put in a position to chair an investigation into some mistake that's been made, you're always going to be a little bit suspicious.
Yeah, but I mean, just when you're talking about the Russia report, that thing that Craig Murray mentioned yesterday, one of the experts called to give evidence to the Russia report was so anti-Russian. He was given a senior position at a Scottish charity that had major problems with the Scottish charity regulator, because basically they were seen as a front for right-wing propaganda. Let's say the boy now works with the Integrity Initiative. That charity funded the Integrity Initiative. Basically, that charity took money from the UK government, kind of moved it around a couple of places, and then punted it into the Integrity Initiative in the hope that people wouldn't know that the UK government were funding said Integrity Initiative. So if UK government inquiries can take evidence from people who are I didn't want to use the term crooked, I should maybe use the term dodgy, then Scottish parliamentary inquiries are perfectly entitled to be led by someone who is nowhere near dodgy, but wants evinced support for an SNP candidate.
I would suggest that it's almost impossible. I mean, during Labour's time as head honchos at Holyrood, it would have been difficult when you look at appointments to the BBC, etc., etc., etc. Everybody had a tie to Labour of some sort because they'd been in government so long and they'd been the premier party in Scotland for generations.
Well, look at the Labour placemen that we're still having problems with in Quangos. There are still people who are extremely senior in health boards, for example, that cause problems within the system, basically because they're trying to help out their buddies in Scottish Labour.
Well, that's kind of, but is there a way to avoid that when you've been in government like the SNP have for 13 years?
I think it's kind of difficult, mate. The long-term thing, patronage is a very strange field. As I say, you want to get experts in. You want, particularly if you're having inquiries, you want the best to be doing it. But it's very difficult because in a wee country like Scotland, you know, how big is the pool? How many experts are there? And again, do we have to rule out experts because of their political leanings?
The other one that springs to mind is Devi Shriver.
Aye, exactly. She's been castigated for her supposed pro-SNP stance throughout this, and most of the time, I think she's not really
it's like you
pro-SNP.
can't be supportive even if the person you're supporting is simply doing a good job. If they're a member of a political party, you can't be supportive because you're presumed to be biased. Debbie Shriver's come out with a couple of things that the Scottish government didn't follow. She's not been totally uncritical, but her general thrust seems to be quite supportive.
It's a general thing in Scotland, though, mate. A lot of Scottish public life is seen through that prism of unionism or independentista.
Well, it brings us quite neatly onto the Monday night BBC Alex Salmond expose. I mean, we're all presuming it's going to be anti-Salmond. Won't we get a shock if it's not?
I'll dye my hair green and run about Leith. In fact, I'll dye my hair ginger and run about Leith in a Celtic top, pretend to be a fat Neil Lennon if it is pro-Salmond.
Well, but I mean, the production company is run by the presenter, who is Kirsty Walk, is run by her husband. But that's, you know, the kind of almost unavoidable.
Well, we've already had, we've got the likes of Andrew Kerr tweeting this morning about the culture of fear that existed amongst the civil service when Alex Salmond was First Minister. Now, this is, I'm presuming, a preamble towards Kirsty Watt's programme on Monday. Are they softening up the punters to believe this nonsense that's going to appear? But you'll forgive me, mate, but until we see the programme, I didn't want to go too much into it. But as I say, I very much expect it to be a continuation of the campaign. Because if it wasn't a continuation of the campaign against Alex Salmond, then the Alphabet Women wouldn't have partaken of the programme. They wouldn't be in it, would they?
That's a bit of a giveaway. I'm still thinking through this, allowing people to be anonymous, but still to, after the court case, continue to snipe from the sidelines behind this wall of anonymity. It's beginning to.
It sticks in your craw, mate. Aye, it sticks in your craw. It doesn't seem to run to what we always talk about. We always take pride in blind justice. And we've had justice. We've had a criminal court case about this. We've had a civil court case about this. In both times, the former First Minister has won the case. And yet still, we are hearing these allegations which were disproved. Well, let's just say they were not proven, one of them, and the rest he was not guilty of. So as far as I'm concerned, he is seeing no justice here. And these women can't keep crying out for justice because they have been afforded the option, the possibility, and they failed to prove their allegation.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, we get it every day. There is some lack of transparency that has to be overcome, according to the press pack at the Nicholas Sturgeon's press conferences. What was it today? Stats on track and trace. They wanted more transparency, and yet they're quite happy to report words from people who are anonymous.
Aye, and afford the words of those anonymous people far greater weight than they afford the verdict to the jury.
Well, nobody is getting the opportunity to question these people.
Yeah, aye. Well, the only time they were held up for questioning, they failed miserably when they were in the witness box.
Aye, that's true.
If they were believable and their allegations were believable, they might have performed better in the witness box and they might have got a different verdict.
Well,
I don't know, mate.
I'm beginning to think that they're on the way to giving up their right to maintaining their anonymity.
I don't think they should have that right any longer, mate. If they're making a TV program to rehash allegations that have been disproved in court, then you'll forgive me, but that anonymity should disappear. And I think a few of them should perhaps have the courage of their convictions and stand up and say what they think their truth is, and then their truth can be fully examined.
Yeah. Anything else strike you today, James?
Oh, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, mate. James Cook last night on the 9, BBC's flagship news programme on their BBC Scotland channel, which gets about, 50,000 viewers if it's lucky. But last night he was speaking to the Transport Minister, Michael Matheson, and he was alluding to a report that came out a couple of years ago, specifically stating the risks of landslides where this train crash happened the other day. And he asked Michael Matheson, did you read this report and what actions did the Scottish Government take? Now, for me, James Cook's a liar and it's complete misdirection there, because that report was made by Network Rail. They are not responsible to the Scottish Transport Minister. They're responsible to the United Kingdom government. When we had the discussion yesterday and I was wondering why Grant Shapps was coming up here, presumably that's why, because he knew there'd been a report and they'd done absolutely naught about it. Now, I'm not necessarily having a go at the UK government here, because that was freak weather, and Scotland does have some very challenging landscapes to run train lines through. But I'm having a go at James Cook, because why is he asking someone who's not responsible for Network Rail to explain Network Rail's actions? Why is he not putting that question to Grant Shapps or to the director of Network Rail?
On a sort of wider issue here, I've always felt that the media have failed miserably to cover devolved issues, to let the public know what is the responsibility of the Scottish Government and what isn't. That's a failure on their part, because they do it all the time.
I think it may very well be deliberate.
Well, when it suits them, we're talking about education because it's devolved. Mm-hmm. You know, we're talking about the Scottish NHS. You can't compare it to the English NHS. It's devolved. They use devolution as a cover to attack, and then they totally ignore devolution when they've got an attack line that they want to use, i.e. a train crash in Scotland.
It's quite blatant, mate. As far as I'm concerned, the BBC are one of the world's biggest propaganda outfits.
Well, the question he should have asked is, what have you done to force the government that is responsible for Network Rail to force Network Rail to do something about this report?
And well, you know, I asked that question because at that point, Michael Matheson would say, well, it was in our manifesto for last year's general election that we are trying to push the UK government to devolve Network Rail's responsibility to the Scottish government because we want to push Network Rail harder. I mean, effectively, effectively 50% of all the problems on the railways are down to Network Rail, and we can do nothing about that. So we push at ScotRail, and we push at Abella when they had the contract, but they can only do so much.
But that's the other time it is routinely ignored that ScotRail is the Scottish government's remit, Network Rail is the Westminster government's remit. Trains are late because Network Rail hasn't done work in a timely fashion because the British government doesn't give them enough money to do the work.
Aye.
But trains are late, that's the Scottish government's fault.
Absolutely. Trains are late, SNP bad.
Yeah.
In fact, everything that goes wrong in Scotland is always the fault of Holyrood and the SNP. Let's be honest. If Brian Taylor's diet went wrong and he burst his breech, the BBC would find some way to blame the SNP.
Well, is it a 30% drop I saw in Scottish whiskey sales, all Scotch, to America because of a line the British government took that Trump didn't like. So Trump slapped tariffs on it, never mentioned.
Scottish Malt Whisky Society have been having a major pop this week at the UK government about this because Liz Truss has managed to get the Americans to drop certain tariffs and what have you, but no on malt. Malt's still getting battered. And it is the biggest export market for Britain's biggest food export. By a country mile, Scotch whisky is Britain's biggest
Has she managed to get the tariff on Stilton dropped?
Mate, I read something about that this week and it astounded me. There was a problem with the trade deal with Japan and it was over blue cheese. And apparently we sell roughly just over 100 grand's worth of blue cheese into Japan in a year. And at that point, Kim, what? But I'll eat that amount of blue cheese if we can get a decent trade deal with Japan.
There's a reason for that, because she stood up at a Tory conference and insisted that one of the most important things to make sure it didn't have tariffs was cheese.
You've got to wonder which one of Liz Truss's uncles or aunties runs a dairy farm at that point.
I've got one issue I'd like to bring up. It's to do with a paragraph from Holyrood, but in a roundabout route. The Tory government is about to put legislation through Westminster, essentially enlarging what are local councils in England. So what they want them to do is councils to represent, I think it's 100,000 population areas. So all the parish councils, who in England can be quite powerful, they can own property and land and things like that. It's not like in Scotland where they're just kind of a group of people that get money given to them to hand out. They actually generate money in England. And the Tories want them to be bigger. And the main reason seems to be that these small councils, the majority of which are run by Labour, Lib Dem and Green coalitions mostly, have quite a big say in things like planning and so on. They're quite a good rallying point for local communities, and they seem to want to be rid of them. There's going to be a bit of a stushy with their own Tories, because quite a few of them, I don't think the majority, but certainly a fair percentage are Tory run.
The Tories have got some weird ideas down there, mate. The railroading planning at the minute to help big business. There's just some odd stuff going on down there. It's clearly how Dominic Cummings wants to run the country, because we can be absolutely certain that he is running the country. Boris is the most part-time Prime Minister we've ever seen. And frankly, he seems to spend most of his time posturing, far more time posturing than he does governing. So I worry about any kind of local government reform down there, because if they get away with it, they will then try and foist the same on us.
It's actually a pity Stuart isn't with us, because he's got good experience of local government down south. He's dealt with it, I think, on a planning level, and his big thing is that it's usually the parish councils that organise the kind of
the resistance to anything coming from.
Well, the holiday weekend thing. I don't know if you've noticed in England, when a town has its Leaf Links Day, it tends to be quite a big affair, and that's the kind of thing they do. They're and they're much closer to the community. I mean, they'll be the closest politicians to the actual people that you bump into on the way to the corner shop.
Aye, but you do wonder sometimes. I mean, come on, mate. This is a massively centralising government. Dominic Cummings has taken all kinds of power to himself and to the small cadre of people round about him that are running the country.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's talking about devolving power down the way. The reason they talk about devolving power down the way in Scotland, for example, is because they think Holyrood's got far too much power.
Well, they want to bypass Holyrood.
They want to bypass Holyrood as much as possible, because the Tories still have some councillors and they still have some influence there.
Which kind of brings us to the other thing I noticed today. They're going to start Union Jack badging.
Aye, yeah.
Projects in Scotland.
You can see how well that worked up at their new UK hub in New Street. Well, massive Union Jack over, I think, 3 floors of the office, this Union Jack.
I think it's 5. I think it's 5 floors.
And somebody graffitied the bottom of it. So
already,
the more Union Jacks they plaster around Scotland, the more people get annoyed about it.
Well, the most interesting thing about that, Jimmy, is it's at the end of the building that's next to the railway that comes out of Waverley. So anybody going south will see it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's anything on the other side of the building, so coming into Waverley, you'll see it. But if you're leaving Scotland, you'll see the Union Jack. I have a sneaky feeling that somebody will find a way to alter that.
I would like to put out a request to anybody listening or watching. If you're in a paintball club, get yourself a few blue pellets. There's a lot of red to be fired at, and if you can turn it blue over the weekend, I will love you forever.
Well, the other thing is, as I say, I'm quite sure there's somebody sitting. In fact, I bet you there's more than one group sitting, working out the size of the decal salt tires that are going to be needed to cover up the Union Jacks that they're plastering all over.
Yeah. I've already seen somebody's done it virtually. Somebody's cleared out the red virtually and put it to blue. So bang on. There's going to be a few wags out there, abseiling painters that go and do it in the dark of the evening, because it wouldn't be difficult to really spoil Boris's weekend by doing something like that, particularly if he's coming up to Scotland this weekend, because we didn't care if he's up here already yet.
Well, I just presumed he was on holiday already, because he turned up at, well, he didn't, did he? He was in London when they asked him about the train derailment.
I think he was, but
has he been interviewed about the exam?
I think he's studiously avoiding it, mate, but I do believe number 10 basically made a comment saying that their system is exceptionally, they didn't call it world leading, but they said it was exceptionally well thought through and was in the best interests of pupils.
Well, what really stuns me about it is I didn't realise this until this Stushy hit the papers, but they have different mocks in different parts of the country.
Mate, it's just the whole system in the UK is a mess. Our system wasn't great, but I mean, there's issues even And as I say, the guidelines for using the mocks aren't out till next week, so nobody's got any clarity on that. But there was a guy on telly this morning saying, basically, most folk didn't work that hard for their prelims or their mocks. They used that as a, no, I done sod all, mate, but I kind of used that as a yardstick to tell me where I had to work, the areas where my knowledge was deficient or not good enough, and I had to then go and bone up on that for the exam. So the whole thing's a mess, man. And you've now got Keir Starmer saying that the UK government should vote pass and do exactly what we done in Scotland, which was nice. And I mean, fair play. At least they waited till after they tried to force John Swinney out of his job before then changing their tune and saying, but what John Swinney's done is right and we should do the same in the rest of the country.
It was yesterday's debate on John Swinney was quite interesting. There were people desperately trying to be fired up, which was weird because we had, I think the best speeches were actually from Labour ex-leaders. Ross Greer, I thought spoke well.
Aye, fair play to Ross. I've been giving him pelters on this for a couple of weeks, but his speech yesterday was cracking, and he did point out to the Tories just quite how hypocritical they were being, and they didn't like that at all.
Who else spoke well? Jamie
Mike
Green
Russell was cracking at the end.
Well, Jamie Green wasn't great.
Nah.
I thought he normally speaks quite well, actually. I mean, I know he's a Tory and all that, but he usually makes sense.
He had the broomstick jammed tight between the cheeks. He's gerius to make. He just had to make these particular political points, and it was like he was trying to squeeze things in. Oh.
Have you fallen off your chair, or has your tablet fallen?
That'd be me chucking the tablet, didn't me? See, you can tell I've not been to these. See, when you catch these politicians and that on camera, and they're doing all this with their hands, you know, they've been to the public, taught how to speak publicly, and they do all this just to remind themselves of their points. That's why my hands fly about all over the place, and hence the reason that the doofer went where the doofer went.
We'll let you off as long as it didn't smash on your foot. And leave me high and dry with nothing to say. So the Swinney resignation loss for the opposition parties was probably actually a good thing in the end, because it looks like especially Labour are going to have to backtrack on what's happening because of what's happening down south. So they're not quite as embarrassed as they could have been had they forced Swinney out.
It's interesting that we've been seeing leaks coming out of Labour in London, just how unimpressed they are with Richard Leonard and how unimpressed they are with the fact that he can't even get Labour into second place in Scotland. Wow. And then today, apparently, just before we came on, I noticed that Neil Findlay's calling for an immediate inquiry into continual leaks from within the Scottish Parliamentary Labour group. So I don't know what's been going on there, but clearly this is a story that's going to develop. Leaks in London, leaks in Holyrood. Will we get some leaks in Wales just to make it a nice wee whole pan-UK thing?
Is this now? I'm about to say something that I can't back up here. Is this the leak that apparently came out of Starmer's office about getting shot of Richard Leonard?
I was wondering that, but no, it specifically says that he's calling for an immediate inquiry into leaks from within the Scottish Parliamentary Labour group, and he says it's been going on for at least a decade. So I don't know, somebody's been briefing against somebody.
It has.
And it'll be interesting to see.
I just presumed there was less leaks because the party was smaller now.
Aye. Well, they're that far away from having their finger on the pulse, mate, that there's very little to leak about with Scottish Labour. They're so reactive. And I mean, Richard Leonard last week took about 3 days to react to what was going on with the exams. And you could tell that the front benchers who are basically wanting Richard Leonard's job They were choking to speak out about what was going on, but were clearly under instruction not to until he'd formulated his own policy and made his mind up what their policy was.
That conversation would have been interesting, because somebody must have been sitting going, let's wait until we see what happens. Somebody surely they've got somebody with enough nous to realise it could have rebounded on them. Well, it's going to rebound on them. Because
it's ridiculous when you've got Neil Findlay calling for an inquiry into leaking. I thought his job was basically just to be a Twitter troll. So,
well, he's kind of, he's not standing at next year's Holyrood elections, is he? He's retiring.
No, I wish he'd just stepped down now, though. He does my boxing with his Twitter trolling.
I have noticed.
Every day.
Anything else to finish with, Jimmy? Anything else strike you?
I've got a belter for you, mate. I've seen a boy on Twitter, and it's possibly the best reply I've seen on Twitter since I've been on it. And it's only a few months, me, but this is an absolute beauty, mate. A guy called Carlo in Zamboland, and he was replying to Maurice Golden. And what he basically said is, watch yourself, Mo. You've not exactly been performing great yourself. You didn't want to end up like Carlo, face down in a bowl of Baxter's cockaliki with Ruthie and Doogie's spoon sticking out your back. And I just about fell off my chair. I absolutely loved that one. So I
Excellent.
Thought people a bit of a giggle. It's just such a lovely image of Ruth and Doogie.
What's Maurice Golden been tweeting about then? Who's he been criticising?
It was the Swinney thing, I think, mate. He was criticising some of the reaction from some Tories around the country about it. And I just thought it was beautiful imagery, you know, and the whole Baxter's thing. It works superbly. So kudos to Carlo in Zamboland. Definitely worth a follow on Twitter just for that.
I'm going to finish with, God, I've forgotten his name.
Michael
Russell. Clip from yesterday during the Swinney debate. I think this is how you deliver a fine speech in Holyrood. You can give me a second to set it up. So Mike kind of left them with nowhere to go.
He kind of slapped them left, right, centre and everybody else.
He really did a good job. Here he is, Mike Russell.
He took responsibility and then he took action to make a difference to those affected. So on any objective measurement, applying any objective tests, he has no case to answer. We could, however, apply some other tests, particularly to those who have been baying for his blood this afternoon. We could try the Lamont Grey test. Is the proposer of the motion blinded by bitterness at their own political failures? Yes. Oh, well, sorry, 2 ex-Labour leaders. There's a lot of them about. The Davidson test, the Green test, is the political ambition so great they don't care about the damage they are doing to either the system or the individuals. Or the Rennie test is the position adopted just in an attempt to get noticed. Anyone who votes for this motion tonight is failing those tests. Presiding Officer, John Swinney has shown himself to be much, much bigger than his accusers. The pupils and the families affected, the really important people, have already shown their appreciation of what he has done. And I hope this chamber is listening to them and not to his discreditable and discredited accusers today. And in doing so, this chamber should apply one final test. I'll call it the Glover test, after the Church of Scotland minister in Perthshire who tweeted it on Tuesday night. And these are his words. I want John Swinney to stay. Otherwise, it's a culture where if you lie and deny, you can stay. But if you admit and address, you must go. I would ask this chamber to rise above the noise and unpleasantness of this afternoon. Let's do what I think Scotland wants and apply the Glover test. Let's not accept that Scotland's a country that prefers lying and denying to admitting and addressing. Let's aspire to something better than bitterness and bile. This week, John Swinney, for the sake of 75,000 young people, admitted and addressed. That is precisely what we should want from our leaders, and that is what this leader did. And that is what this Parliament should ringingly endorse today.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff.
He's going to be sorely missed in the chamber when he stands down next year. And I do hope that he is standing down so that he can be a vital and major part of the independence referendum when it comes.
I've always thought Mike Russell might be that guy, you know, the best leader that the SNP never had. He's always been impressive.
On his day, he is superb, and yesterday was a very, very good day for him. That was a cracking speech.
Cool. Right, I think we'll call it a day at that. Thanks, Jimmy Hutton.
Nice.
I'm Norrie Stewart, and hopefully we'll have Mr. Lockhead back on Sunday.
Yeehaw!
Let's see.
The terrible trio ride again.
and now we can take our hats off now that we're convinced it's Friday. Thanks for listening, folks, and we'll catch you later. Cheers for now.